I do a similar thing. I have a gerontology class that I teach, and I have primarily social work students, but I also have students from nursing and health management and informatics. I've had human development and family studies students in the class as well, and some educational psychology students. And the settings that I use, Tiger Place, of course, and we have an adult day program connected with the university called Adult Day Connections, so they're a feeder too for us. And I have also used other long-term care facilities, the Bluffs, Lenore, which is affiliated with Human Social Services. Similar kinds of things I use. There are standard assessment tools that are out there, so the students learn about, are introduced to the assessment tools. They practice them with each other before going out being assigned a resident. They conduct an assessment, and then they do an intervention plan. We'll come back and we talk about it. The other component of the class is they also do an assessment of family. And what I try to do is the individual assessment that they do, then the second leg of the assignment is that they then do an assessment of the family. And then they compare what the family is saying against what the individual said, and then we talk about if there's congruency, that's fine. If there's not, what's going on with that, and how would you intervene if you were the practitioner in that particular case. Because we have these long-standing arrangements, it is an issue if you do uncover something that is a problem. There was one situation in which we uncovered abuse, for instance, but we connect with the clinicians or the practitioners in those settings who are able to then pick up and run with any problems that are assessed at that point in time.
We should talk.
Yes. I think it's a wonderful, students learn so much. And when I am able
Have you always taught this way, or did you get converted to this, or is this a standard in the?
It's not a standard. This is unusual what we're both doing.
Yeah. See, I come from a competency-based perspective, and my whole approach is you can't learn a competency unless you're actually out there doing it and practicing it. So we do a lot of work with practicing first before they go out, and then actually doing it. And I think that that's the way that people can develop competencies. I have tested for this. I've done a pre-test, post-test, and at least from a perceptual level, students do perceive that they have developed more competencies in the class from the point at which they started to the point at which they ended the class. We also do a community assessment as well, where they can either pick a community or an organization, and then use assessment tools to pick up the strengths and challenges in a community organization.
I would say I do something fairly similar, but from the medical perspective. So I take medical students, internal medicine residents, geriatrics fellows, and palliative medicine fellows, all out into the community, and they come out with me. They have a set of skills that they're supposed to master by the end of the rotation. They have 4 weeks each. Some of the fellows I have a whole year, but and these set of skills have assessments to go along with them, and I take them into places. I take them into long-term care, skilled nursing. We do home visits. We also do hospice visits, interdisciplinary team meetings, and then another thing that we do is actually we have a hospital follow-up system where it's really in its very baby stages, but where some frail older adults are chosen from the discharging pool of people each month, and those couple people have actually a home visit by one of our geriatricians and we take residents along with us to look at that transition back to home, specifically focused on the medication list on paper versus what's really in the cabinet.
That's good.
I do a project in my psychology of aging class, which is an online class, and so my idea was to try and give students some sort of personal touch with an actual older adult. So we have a partnership with the Senior Star Retirement Living, which is Villa Ventura and Wexford in Kansas City, and we assign students to go there for an hour and interview an older adult, and then they have to write a paper based on their interview. And they have guiding questions for the interview related to sort of the biopsychosocial model of aging, so they have to ask something about each of these components. So it's not assessment in any sense, it's really designed to be almost a little mini biography or something like that, just so they have learned certain concepts reading their textbook, and then I want them to see how does this play out in somebody's life. And I've done it twice, and it has worked very well. The students love it, and the older adults love it.
I have a capstone course, senior level undergraduate. I've been doing for years and years. I use Rick book, Concepts and Controversies. And just last night, we were at the Senior Center, or not, at the retirement community there in Manhattan. My students are each assigned a mentor, and I teach my classes at the retirement community, so each student completes assignments with the mentor, the same mentor they have throughout the entire semester. Last night, the controversy was on entitlements, and so we did a poverty simulation, and then we talked about Medicare and Social Security. And it's just remarkable to me that you can teach from a textbook, but you really can't get the kids to understand it from aging perspective until you have them there with the older adults. I've been doing it for probably 8 or 10 years now, and I've had some of the same mentors stay with me through the entire time. And so my problem right now has been that some of them won't move out of the way for the new people that want to come in and be mentors. So I have actually more older adults that want to do it than I can take on. So sometimes I just let them come to the class, and we get 2 mentors to some of the students.
So the older adults attend the class.
They do.
Students and then do the assignments.
Yeah,
That keeps you honest, that the older adults are there.
Exactly, and I'm challenged time and time again, but it's, I think the students learn far more in that setting. I started doing this years ago when I was having a conversation about, it must have been something that I really didn't know a whole lot about because I was younger then, and I thought, well, gee, we should really ask the experts, and then from then on I thought, it doesn't make any sense. And I teach from the textbook, and there are older adults that challenge that and say, no, we got to tell you this is exactly the way it is. And I have students that come back years later and say, I remember more from that experience than I remember. It's experiential learning, I think, is fun.
We failed to mention another project that we do where we pair, it's called the PAIRS program. It's instituted, there's like 4 or 5 universities. We pair up people with early stage Alzheimer's disease with first or second year medical students, and they do all of the activities. And they go out into the community, and they write reflection papers. It's paired with some classroom-based learning as well.
And how do you set that up? I'm gonna come back to that one, but Gail, people might not know, you have a cozy relationship with a very fine retirement community there. K-State actually has a classroom. You have your own classroom.
Well, but it's not big enough, so.
Inside a you have your own classroom in a retirement
Yeah,
community.
well, yeah, I've never been able to use it because my class is too big. So I usually have 25 to 35 students, and then when they have a mentor, that's 70 people, and the classroom holds 20. So we meet in the community room.
We have a classroom at Tiger Place too.
So you have a classroom at the retirement community, or you have.
And then there's also a theater that we
Space
can use, because if it's over 20, that classroom is not sufficient. But then we have the theater, the movie theater that we can use, it's slightly bigger.
My students have questioned our use of metal art to the retirement community because those are affluent older adults. And the students have said, couldn't we be doing some good with people who don't have as much money? And I said, well, that's true. But the people at Metal Art Hills are all former professors and people who have lots of education and training that can help benefit the students. So a true mentorship program is really where the students get a reciprocal relationship. And so we purposely chose those folks. Now, I have a mentor right now who is a professor at Iowa State in the horticulture department and is responsible for putting the stripes in watermelons. So watermelons used to be all green, now they're striped. And Charlie Hall was the person that did that. You know, that kind of life experience is priceless.
Does that make it more attractive for someone?
I don't know if it makes it taste better or
Jessica, how do you set up the pairing up? That was a question I want to ask.
So the med students have to apply into this. We take 10 medical students. This is the first year we've done it funded. We take 10 medical students, and as you might imagine, they're really eager to participate in things that look really good on their resumes for when they apply for the next thing. So this is one of those things. And then 10 folks are selected. They fill out kind of a bio, and then we have people that were chosen by the Alzheimer's Association, and they fill out a bio, and then it's matched up actually by the Alzheimer's Association because they know their folks far better than will ever have students. And we match them up by interest. So if somebody really likes sporting events, then they would match them up with a student who wrote down, I love the Chiefs, you know, so that they could find common interests and things to talk about too.
We had an interesting, kind of unique experience. Most of what I do is put students in 7-month internships in design firms that are doing work as designers for client groups. We had one student 2 years ago that got an opportunity to work for a large for-profit assisted living corporation as the client representative talking to architects. And as part of the living arrangement, they actually gave her an apartment in the complex. So she spent 7 months not only working for a client, but also living in the actual spaces and stuff. And the interesting thing about it was that she was able to make these really incredible personal relationships with people that she would use not as subjects, but as friends. And that's probably very idiosyncratic and very difficult to do, but I just thought that was an interesting model for the ways in which you can put students in contact with this particular population.
And it speaks to the intergenerational model of what students we're trying to create.
I'm Ken Sprabblemeyer, by the way. I think Dennis had me in group 2, but this looks like a great group. So.
Actually, there's a precedent for that, Kent. At Purdue University, and I'm not sure if it's still running, but at Purdue University, it was the operator of, it was either a nursing home or assisted living. I think it was assisted living, or a retirement community, or CCRC, or something like that. Came to the university, said, we would like to house one of your students or 2 of your students. So they formalized the contract where the student would live in the place rent-free for a year, and was obligated to join resident committees, and was obligated to take a certain number of meals in there, so you couldn't run in and you couldn't run out. You had to become part of the life of the university. And these people actually, there are actually 3 PhDs in the field now. They've all gone on to be assistant professors. But they, I know one of them got her PhD, her dissertation, out of that thing. So you'd have to come up with an arrangement with a facility operator. But, you know, they might have the room anyway, and it's a way to support a graduate student. It's a subsidy to graduate students. If you can't give them a graduate research assistantship, maybe you can give them free housing for a year, especially a gerontology student who might be motivated to do that sort of thing. I just thought that that is really, really cool. And the people who did it, of course, would self-select in it. You know, they would apply to do it. They would be the kind of student who would want to do it. But the people, the person I know that did it, she was just blown away. All the residents wanted to know about her love life. They wanted to fix her up with their grandsons or great-grandsons. And she just felt so, and she worked in the thrift shop. That was her job. She worked in the thrift shop X hours a month or something like that. But it's really something I want to try. Actually, they wrote this up in a research art, in a peer-reviewed article, and I can give you the reference to it. But I would love to see that model replicated, because I think we would bring more people into the field if we could do something like that, replicate that model.
Last year, the anthropologists come. We do a lecture series at Metallurgicals, and the anthropologist was speaking to a group, and they put him in this really weird room that was really wide, And so he was speaking, and was a woman that interrupted him and said, "Can't hear you." So he had to eat his mic. And there was a woman off to the side of the room that screamed, "Why don't you look over my direction every once in a while?" And so he realized that here was an anthropological study. That this is a real culture here. And so we were able to help him. Meadowlark had some empty apartments. And so they moved a group of 10 students into Meadowlark Hills for a semester, the spring semester last year. They only got one apartment, so they had 2 students that lived there 2 weeks at a time, and then they rotated out. Each of the students was looking at a different part of the culture. So a couple of students were looking at sexuality and relationships, and they looked at environments and all different kinds of things. And at the end, they had put together a documentary that they showed at Meadowlark, and that they were able to submit to Augie, and they'll be presenting it in the spring semester. So they learned, anthropologists don't really have the twist on aging that some of the rest of us did, and so their documentary came out rather positive because they didn't know how to deal with the negative sides of aging. So we're working on that for the next semester. That was a cool project.
Again, my name is Randy Schwering, and one of my main duties at Rutgers University in Kansas City is to coordinate all the capstone projects. And we have about, every year, about 100 MBA projects, 100 students in projects, working in teams of maybe 6 people per team. And then we also have about 100 undergraduates doing the same kind of thing. And I too believe in the experiential learning dimension of that. What we're trying to do is to, so much of business school tends to be what I call algorithmic problem solving. You crunch the spreadsheet, you come up with the answer, and it's 17 and you're good to go. And I don't think that's the way the world works. And so I'm really trying to hand the students a messy problem that's ill-defined, that there isn't this algorithmic answer to. And then they have to come together, scope the project, really interact with a wide group of stakeholders, and figure out what they're going to do. Typically, these projects are things along the lines, they could be organizational formation. So we've started a number of community organizations. We've started not-for-profit organizations, entrepreneurial startups. And that one of the things that I'm trying to communicate in my classes is that, you know, there's a tremendous thing happening in our demographic composition, and that is obviously the aging of the population, and that represents an enormous economic opportunity for business to address the problems of that group. So we've had a number of projects come out of this program that relate to the area of aging. We've done things along the lines of work with startup businesses in terms of how they can work with the family in terms of rehabbing their house to deal with issues of aging in place. We've also, one of the things I'm really interested in doing is sort of reconceptualizing the notion of what a long-term care facility looks like. My own sense is that that's a model that's kind of broken in some respects, and that there could be some very creative ways of organizing different kind of community-based ways of dealing with the needs of elderly. And I also happen to think that business plays a critical role in this. Business has assets, business has intelligence, business has, believe it or not, a heart sometimes, and can be applied to a lot of these problems. The challenges I run into are, to say it in blunt terms, we have created a culture of greed in business. And so for a lot of students, there's just this bottom lining of everything, what's the profit, and not really a lot of thought beyond that. It's great to work in a Jesuit institution because there are issues like corporate social responsibility, ethics, and those kinds of things are really emphasized very strongly. So we're trying to impart this sense of civic responsibility and leadership responsibility with our students. But that's a hard sell sometimes for students to see, that they see it as sort of a social work project rather than a project that actually can be both a profit opportunity as well as, you know, we call it doing well by doing good kind of situation. The students also seem to be sort of part of this political atmosphere, this notion of public-private partnership, something, you know, government is bad, business is good. You know, not-for-profit's bad, business good. And that, I'm speaking in hyperbole, but I do think that there is a thinking that is somewhat related to that. And part of what I'm trying to do here is to say we can create value in society by looking at combinations of these resources that can create value, that can create a part.
Well, maybe I could address how I teach in architecture, and perhaps my approach is a little bit different. So one of my goals in teaching upper level design studio is to get students to think outside the box in terms of specific building types, and that might be a hospice house, or it might be intergenerational living, or something that perhaps does not yet exist as a building. And the approach that I take is I try to introduce students to the kind of research that some of you generated and other disciplines generate, whether that's in kinesiology, gerontology, you name it, whatever makes sense and can get us some insights into issues that initially may have nothing to do with design. The research was done without design in mind, yet that architects, if they're sensitive enough, can translate into design solutions. So that's sort of what I'm looking for with regard to what my students do. So I try to put them into contexts and situations that they are somewhat unfamiliar with and let them struggle with that. So right now, this semester, this year, as I said before, it's intergenerational living, and then what is that, for whom are we actually designing? And they were given a site in Seattle, Washington, to get them out of the Midwest and to think in ways other than what they might be used to, apply ideas that come from somewhere else, maybe other than what they have seen here. I mean, that's designed that way, to just get them out of the normative. Let's see.
As part of that project last year, we took students to McPherson. McPherson has a retirement community and a small college, and the college was growing really fast. So some of the students were housed at the retirement community for a semester. And so we went down there and used some interdisciplinary students and interviewed some of the seniors to find out how they felt about having younger people living with them as part of an intergenerational housing project. It was kind of enlightening.
It isn't a whole class, but it was one student, Jenny Curatola.
She's the current one of two nominees for the Rhodes Scholarship this year. She'll be interviewing at the end of the month in St. Louis in case anybody's on that board. And she was in an honors class. I taught a senior pro seminar, or a junior pro seminar on literature and the life course. And my experience with students taking these courses on aging is that they typically say, I've never thought about aging. And so she got very fired up, and she's a very self-starting student who seizes opportunities. And so she kept asking for more theory, and she was at that time a double major. Now she's a triple major. She was in theater and English, and then she decided to learn Arabic and become an international studies major. And now her application, which is a beauty in synthesis, is about her goal of using applied theater techniques, which have to do with, it's called community devised theater, interviewing people and using the interview material, weaving it into theatrical performance. And so she got interested in this idea of using applied theater to do a project on aging. It started with a an adaptation of very positive aging stories by a writer named Grace Paley. She was like the most, maybe the only positive aging fiction writer of the materials we read. And so it started with that, but then she attracted a group of experienced and inexperienced actors and took them to a nursing home and conducted interviews and had the actors keep journals and then wove the journal material in with the story material. And then she presented this piece at the community center in Lawrence, and she had talkbacks, and we were on the panel of talkbacks. And as a part of this, she also became an intern at a very competitive theater program called CO in Amherst, Massachusetts, that was focused on theater and aging that summer. And she was one of the people who was instrumental in adding aging nonprofit sites to the list of sites that the Alternative Breaks program, KU, which places students all over the country, adding an aging component to some of the placement. And this is kind of one of the centerpieces now of the kind of work she wants to do, which is use applied theater to do cultural diplomacy in the Middle East.
But she workshopped this play that she produced as her honors thesis out of a nursing home. She went over, I mean, she had them all talking and read journals and other actors, and they collaborated together, and they generated this out of people's experience and the Grace Paley.
And the Grace Paley stories. And I would say that the theoretical basis for her paper was actually, came out of Laura Carstenson's lecture here. And so her original title was about affective forecasting, and one of her original goals was to get young people to think differently about their own aging and about, you know, the body and imitating aging, acting aging on stage. You know, she went through a lot of different stages. At first she was just thinking about casting because she worked at a casting company in Kansas City. You know, it was pretty, very, very generative. And she's not the only student. She's the most spectacular case, but in the 4 classes I've taught over the last 2 or 3 years, students have done pretty remarkable things.
I was at the play, I mean, I don't want to dominate with this, but I was at the play, and in that play, all of a sudden language is coming out of these actors' mouths, and I know where that language comes from. Kids, people don't say life course. People just don't say that. Out comes life course, out comes a couple of other complete theoretical concepts from taken right out of it could have been out of Rick Moody's textbook. Out it comes, out of their mouths, and you're going, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever, this is just, I almost cried. It was so awesome.
And it was on in a snowstorm in February.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it strikes me that an area of commonality in what I'm hearing from a lot of these experiences is really putting students in a situation where they're unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and they have pre-existing biases about what that situation is. And I never really thought about this until now, that in many respects, marketing, which may, for some folks, may seem like a bad thing, but that's really what marketing is stepping into somebody else's reality that's very different from your own and deeply understanding what it's like to be in that situation, in that context. Something, you know, a big area right now is international business. When you think about setting up a business in Thailand, you know, an American business goes to Thailand, sets up a business. Usually the reason those businesses fail is because there's not this understanding that these people are different, have different needs, and there's really a whole cultural thing there that students walk in with these pre-existing beliefs. And so this kind of study, in a sense, is going to a foreign land and dealing in a different culture than you're used to, and that's good, because that skill is useful across the board.
The flip side of that, though, is that we all age, and so, I mean, as much, I want my students as much to appreciate that older adults are really not any different than them, where it counts. And so, I mean, I think to be careful about, and you know, gerontology, our whole focus is that last part of life. But on the other hand, And I think someone said that the language when you go into and talk to older adults is different than the language we use. For them, it's just life. And I think we have to be careful not to overemphasize difference in this, because that actually breeds division. And what we really need, and I think the other thing that I hear with all of these really cool ways of teaching and bringing people together, it really is building mutual understanding, because it's a two-way street. The older adults benefit as much as the young.
I just have a question about the logistics. So things like consent in your case, or and things like tuition, and how do you structure the mentoring process? And do you just act, Gail, as if you have 70 students and you're kind of teaching to the whole group? How do you structure the mentor-student relationship? I get stuck in the logistics.
It's developed over years, but we don't meet every week. We meet every other week at the retirement community. That gives me a chance to bring students back into the classroom and talk about what they're experiencing. It also gives us a chance to do things like some of the students won't give presentations in front of the older adults. So there are lots of things that we have to do that are away from the older adults as well. Consent issues, I don't know what you mean by that.
Good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this question about, when what you're doing involves information and when it involves learning.
Yeah.
When you're interviewing some, so for example, your McPherson example, was that an informed consent?
We did have that.
Yeah. And
So
so,
it's going to be something that we think we might want to use as research. Yes, we do have to go after consent. Typically with my class, we haven't done a lot of research, although we're doing sort of a cool project this year. I don't know if you might hear about it, but I'm telling you anyway. This summer I saw on CBS Sunday morning a feature on a photographer in New York City who was grabbing people off the streets and as strangers having them take pictures together. Some of you are shaking your heads, you saw it. And what happened in that was that over a period of 10 or 15 minutes, these people who had no connection, after they'd been taking pictures together, actually started to feel like they knew each other. And at the end, one woman was interviewed and she said, now I think about all the people I pass on the street that I could have a relationship with, and I don't. Well, as I watched that, I thought, well, cool, this would be really cool with my mentors, because I wanted to speed up the connection with them. So we actually showed the video, so I primed them, and so that would probably take away from the benefits of the research that we're doing. But I primed them ahead of time, showed them the video, told them to bring props, and then we took pictures of them. And the pictures are incredible. We had people who had met each other, and they looked like they were the best of friends. And so at the end of the semester, we'll interview the residents, the mentors, and ask them if they felt any differently about these students and the former students that they've had. And it'll just make a sort of a fun way of us being able to tell people about the way we teach and about the way we make connections in our class. So that I did get a number for. So anything else?
I was asking about like tuition, but because you were saying the mentors do the reading.
Mentors, people over the age of 65 in Kansas can take classes.
Thank goodness. That hasn't been that long, though, was it?
Since I've been teaching. They can audit classes. I think initially I was supposed to get all their social security numbers, but I don't do that. Don't have those. So that hasn't been an issue for me.
But they don't take any exams or write any papers,
No, they could if they want to, but they don't. Sometimes they like to help their students. I once taught a health promotion class, and I had the students pick an older adult that they were going to try to help to create a new behavior. And it was theoretical based, and it was kind of interesting stuff. And they almost all chose their grandparents. And I was just literally amazed by how many people lost weight at the end of the semester. And I couldn't figure out how that happened. All the grandparents thought that if they didn't lose weight, their kids wouldn't get an A in class. And so I'm thinking, there's something about this. I'm just going to work. Yeah.
Are there things that you'd like to try that you, I mean, we're hearing about things that people have tried. Are there things that you'd like to try? In clinical training or grad students or undergrad classes?
I think it would be really great to do like an interdisciplinary like assessment where you have a psychologist, a physician, a social worker, a nurse, and everybody contributes to the assessment. And then you talk about it, talk about the strengths and differences of each approach. It would be really cool.
So we do that, but without the talk about it part. So we have a couple assessment clinics that have both at CUNY and at the VA that do that interdisciplinary. It's very cool. And they involve therapy also.
I just completed it last week where I met with a group of OTs who for their leadership class, they are supposed to put together projects. And so these are essentially clinically based projects, some of which had to do with aging. And so they came up with their plan. This is all the stakeholder analysis and all the various aspects of their planning process. My undergraduates, we had a poster session where I had business students come in and critique the plans of the OT students, have a little conversation about that. And it really, I think even though the OTs were at the master's level and the undergrads were younger, there still was, I think, value transacted there. And the OTs said they really valued that differing perspective on their planning process.
There's a big movement nationally now in interprofessional education. I serve on the committee that's trying it for St. Louis, and we actually did the intervention use, and we videotaped it. It was fun, but it was really challenging, and we had to do tons of convincing to get the different professionals to work together. But we did do a post-survey, and people really, and the students that responded, I really learned something today. I didn't know this other profession even thought about this. So we had optometry students, and people were amazed that optometry students even cared about social issues. And yet they did, and even asked about social issues. So,
Excuse me.
Well, I just found myself thinking that perhaps even more modest efforts at the thing with humanities and the role of, I think what your comment at lunch, that there may be ways of enriching the way students that apply social sciences and all the other areas we're talking about here, think about things. I remember when I was in college and graduate school, the occasional social work professor who would have us read a novel, and not a or theater, these were occasionally art, but typically novels, and just as a touchstone to come back to once in a while, to refer to a relatively small component of the course, how interesting that was, but when done well and selected carefully. There's something about particularly graduate students when we're teaching them social science research methods, which are so important, qualitative, quantitative research methods, gathering data, paying attention to research, understanding the theories that organize the research. Really important. In some ways it stretches their minds as a challenge, but in some ways it narrows their minds too to what they think about. It's got to go through that sieve. And that's probably a temporary process. It changes as you become more comfortable when you're practicing professional. It's an important process, but maybe it can be leavened a little bit or modified a little bit by keeping them in touch with the richness of the humanities, even while they begin to think like applied social science. So I think they start trying more.
Well, if I could just follow up, I mean, that's sort of this is my question, is to what extent could you imagine cultural material being useful to you? And I want to push a little bit away from the novel, even though that's where I began, because I think the degree of cultural immersion in material from television, cinema, and of course, computers and phones is really significant. And I was talking with Rick Moody, who said that people over the age of 65 spend more time watching television than any other activity than sleeping. And so from our point of view, studying this, what we're interested in obviously is the role of this material in constructing people's imagination and desires and attitudes about one another and themselves. Very significant, not a leisure activity. And so I just wonder if there's any way, you know, that people who do the kind of things you do could imagine there being any benefit in consulting or working with people who do this kind of work, because increasingly, as you know, I mean, all of us are supposed to be finding funding for our research, and what's happening on the humanities side is just a lack of resources, and what's happening, as I understand it, on other sides is a requirement to do interdisciplinary research and to include someone from, you know, the social sciences or the humanities or whatever in your grants. And so everyone has a stake in trying to figure out what could be productive. And I've heard talk after talk of people who are much more active than I am in trying to involve themselves in this, but still always asking the same question, which is, how can I be taken seriously? What can I contribute? So that would be a follow-up. Thank you for raising that.
One of the things that we had in social work is schools of social welfare, and social workers come, you know, students go out and work in the field for 3 days a week, and the ones that choose 80, you know, so they're in the 80 agencies. We got an infusion of money nationally from the Hartman Foundation to create Hartford practical partnerships, and so we had some funding to do a lot of these things and do research on it. And so we did a lot of things we were talking about. One of the things we haven't talked about, and I guess because I was interested in policy, I built a policy piece in, so I would have actually Kathy Greenley, who was the Canada's Department on Aging secretary at the time, and now is the administration on aging, and actually is hired a couple of students, would come to a class of 8 or 9 people and talk about policy. And we had nursing home directors and somebody that's director in the area who looks about aging. And then that helped the students connect with what I'm seeing in the field with policy, and then we talk about, so then how would you do something about the policy? I don't want to transition us into the challenges too soon, but for whatever reason, we were rocking, we were rolling. We had a little money from Criticare to pay for some of the stipends and such, and each student got $1,000 to be part of this. But when we had a combination of the faculty was really driving it left, and then that dried up. And what I see as a real challenge is the funding piece, because in social welfare, we, as a state school, and people in social welfare, a lot of times are students that don't have a whole lot of assets. So if there's any money available, like through child welfare, or like through another area, that's a huge piece of it. So I think one of the big challenges is having some sort of a funding for even the students that are interested, like, for instance, free housing. You know, that could be a good thing. But how we're going to figure out that funding piece, I think, is a key.
I think Dave, you did ask for challenges, and for me, Joan mentioned that with online education, that you set up a project for students to go out and interview, and we do that too. But I think in my role has been to create relationships, and I think that's been a lot more difficult for us to do in online education. And I think now that so many seniors are online, that it would be possible to create some relationships online, but I haven't explored that at all. We do have an online master's degree, so we're always looking for ways to make that strong.
It's so clear to me that I regularly teach an undergraduate survey course. I'm also teaching graduate courses, but undergraduate survey course. It's so clear to me that my course could be, which I already think is excellent, but could be so much better. So much better if students had an encounter. But you know, university scheduling is there are 90 minutes here and then they go 90 minutes somewhere. You can't put them in the car and take them somewhere. And I guess there are ways around that. You can bring older people to class, but our campuses are enormously inaccessible. I mean, it's a major effort to get anybody into a classroom. Where do you park? Where do you how do you walk there, and so on and so forth. And then when you get them in the classroom, how do you control them? How do you know that they're not going to go off? And I knew a 102-year-old woman. I kept wanting to bring Margaret, but I kept wondering if she was going to go off on her relationship with Jesus. She's very interesting about her life, but she could go off onto this, and there was no way. There's really no way to stop her if she started going there. I think, I think about Alzheimer's disease and how profoundly unusual those people are to encounter, and the great amount of family care that goes into Alzheimer's disease and the fear of it. And I would like my students to encounter Alzheimer's patients, but and I put this thing about using older people as exhibits. That's totally, I don't know how to, how am I going to do that?
Actually, I have a suggestion for you, that I can do it maybe, but, you've got spray departments for retired faculty there,
Yeah.
and it's just right close to where you are.
Yeah.
So recruit one of those retired faculty, tell them what you're looking for. They go out, screen their friends, and then they figure out the transportation, and then they come to your class. And in terms of actually having somebody with Alzheimer's, I've never done that, but I had a caregiver of a patient of an older adult with Alzheimer's
Yeah.
who taught all about the experiences. And then how I built it to the class was I said, these are people that you can ask anything about aging, but you were afraid to ask. And so the faculty person starts off saying, if you want to ask about my sexuality, that's fine, and she makes a joke about that. And then she brings in her other friends, and it's a rollicking time.
In Topeka, we have an interesting laboratory there. I don't know if anyone's really studied this. Lots of older adults go to our classes. First of all, it's a smaller university in a smaller city, so it is much more accessible. But also Topeka is, I believe, the last municipally chartered university, one of the last in the country. And there's this real feeling of ownership in Topeka. I mean, it's a public university, but it's not part of the Kansas Board of Regents. It's a municipal chartered university, and people pay sales taxes. This is their university. And so, like many other cities, when you're over 60, 65, you have a right to take classes for free. They really feel that way at Topeka, like this, hey, we're paying for it. And so we get lots of older adults with many blessings and advantages, some challenges also. I don't know if it's been studied much, those dynamics, but we have an interesting laboratory.
We have the adult day connection, is that adult day center that I talked about, that is right on campus. And that is just a wonderful learning laboratory. There are disciplines, all disciplines participate in the education and learning. And the plus for the participants of the day center is that it provides them stimulation and activities to be involved in. So there are no problems with parking, and they're right there. It's great.
In my interview project, so it's an online class, but students I make appointments for them to sign up, and they go on Sunday afternoons or in the evening during the week, so I give them 2 or 3 times they can choose. And when I first tried it, I kind of worried about it because I thought people would say, well, this is why I'm taking an online class, so I don't have to be anywhere. I got no pushback at all. And they will go on a Sunday afternoon, but it is also just once a semester for an hour. It might be not as hard as you think to get people to do something outside of class hours.
One thing that occurred to me, we were talking about that, we had an instance a few years ago.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Where we had 4 students in their capstone studio wanted to do something with the memory unit at Brandon Woods. We found it was very difficult to do that simply because of all the IRB and all of the difficult situations. And so what happened was they simply found that one of the things that group uses very heavily are plants. They go out in the garden and actually try to plant. So they built planters that could be used by people that had to stand and plant. And what occurred to me when you were talking about this was the fact that you could almost, rather than just simply having architecture students, you might have a team of people that were building that and doing that had from different disciplines. And just the act of doing something and engaging people, all of a sudden you realize that you're not doing research, you're not conducting a class, you're simply participating in that group. And so this idea of maybe combining different disciplines and different kinds of methodologies, I think really has a way to get around a lot of these barriers. Because if we'd simply done a research with the IRB, would have been a nightmare. The all of the restrictions that are in place and the artificiality of it, as opposed to simply doing something useful, observing, and drawing other people into that process.
You know, something I found challenging is to get diversity, like, I always wanted to speak with people as a Native American elder and African American, Hispanic, somebody with a same-sex relationship for my panel. Again, that good old retired faculty person would go out there and round them up. But I think that that's an important piece too, to figure out how we get more diverse older adults into our classroom that we're living life.
Are we ever exploiting people though, using them as exhibits?
I don't know, all these folks were just so happy to come and
Yeah.
talk. I mean, they were just delighted with the campus.
I would say that, I thought about that, and I think that's a tough question. I would say that if, just like on the surface, if you're asking people would they want to participate and they're saying yes, that there's consent there. Now, do they feel coerced to say yes? You know, we don't know that. So there is that element, well, you know, maybe. But the response that I have received from the people that we have participated with is that they are very proud of the fact that they are helping educate students. And it makes their life more meaningful and more productive. And like some of you have already talked about using retired professors, I think it helps their trajectory, that they're continuing to participate in the education and training of others.
I've always seen the older adults that we bring to our classes as teachers. And I recall having you come to a class one time, and I didn't think of you as being on exhibit. So it's very, very similar, is that if you think of them in a whole different context, is that not that they're specimens or a different species, but teachers.
And some of my folks really wanted to tell those young social workers like it was, you know, and they got, hey, oh.
I think a part of it is if you're treating them as people and you're inviting them as people, and if there's a give and take. If it's I'm bringing an Alzheimer person to you today, and that's the focus, then that's exploitative in my mind. If it's more broadly, I'm bringing Mabel, who has Alzheimer's, but she has this life history and story, and I want you to know the complete person. I think that's a different. That's okay.
You know, one strategy that I found that didn't work is I let, well, I haven't actually talked too hard about it, which is sometimes that happens to me. But anyway, a student said that he wanted to bring his grandfather. And so I said, okay, because he's going to talk about something. That grandfather got there, and he was completely speechless, and he never could say anything up in front of that classroom. Now that was exploitive. So that was when I went to we're going to screen these folks, you know, somehow before. I did not ever again allow students just to bring their grandfather as an exhibit, or the speaker, you know. That was a mistake.
One of the things I've been using a book by Margaret Morgan Roth-Goulet called Age by Culture. She has another book called Age Wise, and she argues for age studies as opposed to gerontology, because she argues we should understand that we have age all through the life course, not just when we hit a certain number and get old. And I have found this really exciting to talk about with students, because it's sort of like affective forecasting, which is to say that they're understanding that the ways in which they themselves are constructed by their age. And I was thinking, you know, when we were talking about bringing older adults into the classroom, that part of what's so bizarre about it is that it's normative that college students that people in the U.S. go to learn between the ages of 18 and whatever, which is just constructed. And, you know, it could be that we normally understood our learning environments as environments that would include people of all different income brackets and people of all different ages, and in a sense accepting that constraints of our learning environments as if they were normal is it kind of imposes the freakishness of someone who's outside of those constraints coming into the classroom. And so I kind of use those normative constraints to ask students to imagine another setup. You know, because it's not been forever that we've had, well, obviously, you know, I mean, we haven't been organized this way forever, and we won't be organized this way in 50 or 100 years. In fact, I'm wondering about 10 years from now. But we're still going to have higher education organized in the way we're accustomed to it.
I had kind of a direct experience with that sort of on both extremes. Recently, rather poignant thing for me, had a gentleman come in his 80s that was a kind of retired executive in a foundation, and literally had a heart attack in class, and he recovered somehow or another, died unfortunately 2 days later, but really impressed upon the students that this is, you know, this is a part of life. And then a week later, I had a young woman bring, she had no other option, can I bring my young child to the class? And it just struck me, I thought back to my own college experience where there's this hyper narrow age demographic in university classes, and you sort of have this whole fuzzy world built around that very narrow age cohort. And I can attest to the fact that on both ends of that spectrum, it changed the dynamic of the classroom. It's just flat different.
I teach in mostly graduate students, and I get students of all age. So, and it's been a long time since I've been just teaching undergraduate students. So I agree with you, because what happens is that you have people that come to the class and they have different life experiences, and that then enriches the discussion that you have in class, whatever topic it is that you're examining.
It's interesting to play with the idea of multi-generational education. You know, what would a multi-generational classroom look like?
That's what the one-room schoolhouses did for 100 years, right? My mother was the last teacher in her one-room schoolhouse. They played with multi-generational, and it wasn't just 1 through 8, because the boys often couldn't finish until they were 21, because they could only go half the year because they were doing harvesting in the field. So she talks about it. She's 95. She still talks about having a 21-year-old and a 6-year-old in the class, and it may have been the most effective educational setting that was ever devised. In architecture, you do what you call vertical studios, or sometimes comprehensive studios, in which you have maybe sophomores up to graduate students in the same studio, working with each other, teaching by learning, learning by teaching. I think that we have unnecessarily, well, maybe necessarily narrowed it down, and we ought to be opening it up, because we have all these boomers who say they want to have continuing education, and they want a strong association with universities. And we put them by themselves out in the Osher Institutes. It's sort of like segregating them out by age into the nursing home. It's the same problem to a certain extent. I've taught an Osher Institute, and I love it, but it seems to me that the multi-generational classroom is probably the place where you would have a breakthrough. Again, going back to the past to look for models that might work in a different interpretive way now.
This is changing the conversation a little bit, but this is something that I've been visiting with at K-State, is that as our life expectancy gets longer and longer, we need to start thinking about having a second education, because that's just the way the world's going to be, is that you don't want to stay with a job for your entire duration. So I keep telling them that their targeting needs to go toward the older student, and that we need to have support services and setups for people who are middle-aged, so that they feel comfortable going back to school. I think you're right.
We get a lot of that. We get a lot of people who are changing careers. For some reason, a lot of people who were writers or journalists, And part of the reason why they say they turned to social work is because they were reporting on issues and problems, but were never allowed to do anything about those issues or problems. So at some point in their life, they wanted to make a change so that they could go to those issues and problems and actually make a difference and do something about them.
There's so much unemployment in people. It's not wanting new jobs, but the jobs no longer existing. And there are so many people out there, some of whom are going to school, trying to seek new skills. And it's an unfortunately large market.
That too.
Let me go back to something. Those of you that have relationships with places, how do you cultivate those, or how do they come about? I think that I would like to I could take a graduate class. Actually, it was interesting. I've fallen out of a relationship with one of our retirement communities here in town, but I took all 8 of them, and we sat in an assisted living apartment and conducted the class. That's really tight, 8 people sitting in an assisted living apartment, but it's a very good lesson. How do you establish or cultivate relationships with these places or maintain them? Or do you just take for granted that Tiger Place is always welcoming to you?
Oh, no, I massage those relationships.
How do you do that?
And the leadership has changed too, so you have to, every time the leadership changes or personnel changes, you need to reintroduce yourself and talk about the projects and would people be willing to participate or help. So on a regular basis, I connect with the leadership and talk about the projects. For those who don't know about them, are they willing to participate? For those ongoing relationships, I check in, are you still, willing to accept some of our students? So I'll never take it for granted. And I do things like I make up goodie baskets and take them around to the facility so that everybody can enjoy a goodie. And that's part of, I think, massaging those relationships as well. So not taking for granted the time that those people spend with my students. So it's a little way that I give back with a little thank you note for caring and helping my students grow and learn. And I think that's very appreciative.
Oh, it's work.
It is work. It is work. People are on break, and I'm running around taking, baskets to places, but it works and it's effective. And I do think that we need to thank people for taking the time to work with our students and not take it for granted. And I think year after year after year, I have the same facilities that say, sure, we'd be happy to work with your students. And this isn't a college town where they get, a lot of requests.
Social work programs, type I'm associated with, we have a built-in advantage, I guess, in terms of having long-term relationships, because nursing homes, retirements, nursing homes, social service agencies that service, at least in part, nursing homes and other related agencies, they need social work students. They need bachelor's level or master's level social work students. Sometimes we're generous and help out, but oftentimes they need them. The need is mutual. So it's sort of a built-in relationship. I never thought much about this, but I wonder whether other related disciplines might want to find some ways to associate with, piggyback, I don't know how to say it, associate with social work programs, because some of these agencies, and particularly living centers and nursing homes, I'd appreciate some of the wider ranges of programming, things that could be offered by other disciplines, classes that could be offered, seminars, students from other disciplines come out. Because social work tasks tend to be fairly focused. Sometimes they will do parent education and broad programming, but they tend to be psychosocial assessments and treatment on fairly prescribed matters. There's a whole range of other tasks, I guess, could be done. They would welcome free training services.
We do that a bit at Tiger Place. We have vet students come out and take care of the residents' pets. And the nursing students come out and they give them pedicures. It's called a Happy Feet program. And we have rehab come out and do assessments and help with that. We have medical students come out, so it is.
Big done.
We have a lot, and we're starting to get journalism students to come out and and, you know,
Interesting.
do media
Yeah.
bits on, you know, Tiger Place and what the residents are doing, so.
And I'd just like to put in a pitch that in virtually every dimension of the activity that's happening that I'm hearing about, you have an organizational context, you have issues of leadership, organizational structure, funding, all these kinds of things. And those are, you know, clearly in the purview of the kinds of things my students do, which is management. So going into an organization and dealing with a staffing problem or a structure problem or a governance problem. Those are ways I think that our students could interact in these contexts also.
At UMKC, we were actually approached by the Silver Star corporate because I think their corporate said we were looking for some value added in the competitive market, and we would like to say we're affiliated with the university. And so they came to us and said, well, we'd like to partner with you. You know, how can we do that? And so that's why those are the places I chose to take my students to do their interviews. But it's definitely a two-way street because they're looking for programming, they're looking for extra things for their residents. You know, the expert who comes and talks on Medicare or something like that. But to the extent that we can provide that, we want to try to do that because we do get a lot back at the same time.
We actually have a formalized relationship with through paper signing and stuff like that. We call it circle of care. And it's reciprocating in that my staff does continuing training for the staff at Miller Workforce. And I'd like to add on to what she said. But that's basically how we got started with this. We decided, oh, I know what it was, that I think most retirement communities really want to have a relationship with communities. And for Metal Art to be able to say, we have a K-State classroom, I mean, it looks like it was good for us, but it's good for them too.
We did for sociology students who are doing research or term paper on a number of topics who want to develop skills in interviewing skills and data gathering skills. To go out, perhaps in association with some social work students, or perhaps what are other ways?
I never thought of that, piggybacking on the relationships that the social workers.
There's a whole field that many know sometimes goes under the term narrative therapy or narrative counseling. But the research has just really blossomed in the last 15 years. The cognitive and emotional advantage of older adults, of people caring enough about them to ask about their lives, and the cognitive benefits of reconstructing their lives, and just the ability to talk about that. It actually blossomed into a field of narrative therapy, actually. And I would think that it wouldn't be just clinicians and social workers, sociologists, anthropologists, who might care enough, students, might care enough to investigate a certain line of what was it like during this decade of your life. I'm looking into that decade. I'm studying that decade and making something from different angles as a sociology student. But I wonder what you remember about the 1940s or after the war, or 50s. What was your life like? And it's part of my overall project. I think it would get people open up about the richness of their own life. Good two-way street.
Maybe one last question. Other people are going to be coming. Oh, are they coming in already?
No,
Okay.
they're not.
What about when, you know, I'm thinking about the architects, you send them out to work in a firm, or what about when you get institutional officials or firm officials tell people things? Do you find you have to correct things when, or some staff at some place might say something and you have to correct? You sent them out there to learn in a setting, and now you have to correct it? You have to deconstruct what they might have learned, or to ask them to unlearn. I mean, I'm talking about the dangers of actually sending people out somewhere. They would mislearn something.
I think you have a responsibility to do a lot of due diligence before those relationships occur. And again, in one respect, I hate to say that, because I think one of the things you're trying to do in terms of internships or other kinds of service learning kind of opportunities is to put people in situations that are uncontrolled and are completely spontaneous. But I do think there is a certain responsibility in terms of those kind of relationships being very carefully considered and almost. I just was curious too. I'm assuming most other universities are beginning to get institutionalized in terms of service learning. Is that becoming a large part of your? Say it's.
Yeah, it's available. It differs by discipline.